This is Your Other Brothers Podcast.
Welcome, friends, to Your Other Brothers Podcast, navigating faith, homosexuality, and masculinity together. I'm your host, Tom, and here with me on this episode is my brother, Ryan.
Hey, everyone.
And joining us once again, a long-lost hiatus, is our other brother, Marshall. What's up, Marshall?
Hello, good to be here.
You're back. It's
Yes.
been a while, Marshall. We are here, three of us, talking about a very fun concept today, the concept of generations. This is called the YOBcast, generations.
Generations.
So it feels like a bit like a superhero, like an epic adventure.
Yeah, this is like the fourth installment in the franchise.
Right. We're doing the YOBcast generations. Maybe it's like some sort of an origin story. That's what I'm picturing. I'm picturing some kind of...
No, we're thinking about this because there was actually an X-Men Generations.
Was there?
Yeah.
No, I didn't know that. I knew there was a Star Trek Generations because I grew up in a Star Trek household.
Uh-huh.
So I know there was a Star Trek Generations. But yeah, I do recall that there was an X-Men Generations too.
We would have to like flash back to like the younger versions of ourselves during like the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so that is what I want everyone to have a picture of. Us flashing back to our younger selves, older selves. We're going to be spanning the decades today in this fun little episode. So I'm excited that y'all are here. We're going to talk about all kinds of things today regarding the different generations that we are in this community. So first, let's go to Marshall, because Marshall, it's been a while since you've been on an episode. And sadly, regretfully, you were not part of our retreat that we had a few months ago. It was the first retreat that you could not attend, and your presence was sorely missed, mainly at the Twister competition, which I would have loved to have you participate in, but sadly it wasn't to be this year. But I'm glad we could reconnect here. Last time I think I saw you, Marshall, was at Revoice. We were at the Revoice conference. Yes. Which was great. What was your, maybe this is better served later in the conversation, but what was your quick take, your hot take on the Revoice conference? Because that was the last time I saw you a couple months ago in St. Louis.
Well, I loved meeting all the people there. There were many very sincere Christian believers that were making a big sacrifice to follow the teachings of Scripture and, remain celibate because, Scripture, I believe, and of course the Revoice conference taught that, we need to obey those commands that basically say that sexual activity outside of marriage between a man and a woman is wrong. And so many people have given up that kind of sexual activity, and that can be a real sacrifice. And so there, with so many people so serious about their faith, it was just refreshing to talk through how people had made this sacrifice joyfully because of pursuing Jesus Christ. I enjoyed many of the people that I met and heard their stories.
Yeah, it was awesome to have you there, along with Ryan, along with so many of our other authors as well, and it was a great experience meeting so many folks from all over the place. And then Ryan, as for you rescued a stink bug this morning.
I did.
That's what's up in your life.
By rescue, I mean removed it from my house.
And you made the comment that you should have maybe fed it to a spider as a peace offering, which is not a bad idea. Like if there's a horrific, disgusting, gigantic spider dwelling just outside your home, it might be a good peace offering. It might be a good deal to like feed it things. So as long as you stay there, don't come inside, you'll be fine. You'll be taken care of.
Right. Or maybe the spider starts to eat the stink bug and it stinks, and the spider realizes how much I hate it.
Right. I wonder, I don't know, do spiders eat those? I wonder if they do.
That spider will eat whatever I give it.
And you have this fun tradition where people who stay here why don't you say, what is your tradition for guests?
Well, I have a guest bedroom, and in the guest bedroom I have a wall where people that where we hang like selfie pictures, like a little Instax mini camera. I don't know, like whoever's familiar with that. It's kind of like a Polaroid camera. It produces this instant picture that develops while you hold it in your hand. And so the requirement for staying at my house is that that you take a selfie with the camera somewhere on the property and sign and date it and hang it on the selfie wall in my guest bedroom. And I've collected a few new pictures recently, and it's filling out nicely. I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, I love that. It's a fun tradition. Mm-hmm. I was honored to be one of the first.
Tom's got one of the first pictures on the selfie.
One of the first, and then it's cool. I have my own tradition at my residence where I have a guest bed that I built with a friend, and anyone who's spent the night has signed it, and so y'all have signed it. I forget what the tally is, but I think somewhere around 40 or 50 or so different people have stayed over, many from within the YOB community, and it's been cool to, it's cool to have something for others to partake in, to feel like you're connected to something bigger than just a single night or a single weekend, a single visit. So I'm a huge fan of that idea. It just kind of inspires me. Like if anyone out there has any guest traditions, if you have like a guest book, I know people do that. Any kind of like overnight guest traditions that you have in your household, I would love to hear those, because I love stuff like that. So either comment on our site or shoot me an email or something. I'd love to hear, how do you guys treat your guests? As for me lately, for some reason, because I've always been something of a traveler throughout my life. But for some reason, like the last month of my life, I've been traveling way more than I usually do. Like I came back from a trip to Minnesota, and then got to like go see my family. My little niece just turned 1 year old, so I got to go see her in Alabama. And then I drove to see a friend in Virginia, and then I went to hear someone preach a sermon in Knoxville, Tennessee. And now I'm here with you guys on the other side of North Carolina. And so it's been a bit of a whirlwind for me the last month or so of just traveling, coming home for like maybe a day or two. I think this week I was home for 4 days, which was like such a long stretch for me.
It's a new record.
The new record of the month. For 4 days straight, I was in the Jewel. But it's been so good though. Like as tiring as it's been, the miles that I've racked up on my vehicle, as much as all of that's happened, I love that all of it has been people-oriented, people-centric, and whether it's people within the YOB community or my family or people outside the YOB community, like it's been really great to make those connections, deepen those connections, and I'm sure many of those people are listening right now. So it's fun to be able to connect with y'all in person, and it's something I'm hoping to do more of in the future is to connect with our readers, our listeners, our supporters, and very quickly becoming my friends. And it's really awesome that it's not, I don't know, I just feel super honored and humbled. I'm getting all emotional. But the fact that, something like a podcast and a blog, like we can sit here around a microphone and it can feel very robotic and impersonal, but the fact that this is going somewhere and resonating with people so much so that they would encourage me to visit. I know, like Ryan, you met with one of our readers the other day, and that's really cool. Marshall, you've met a few of our readers passing through your neck of the woods over the years. So I just love the relational aspect of what we do, and so we wouldn't be here without y'all doing it. So I appreciate all of that. It kind of ties into just some stats and some updates from our neck of the woods, from the other side of YOB. But we actually, I don't know if I guess y'all aren't aware of this, I'm breaking this to everyone, is that we just hit our 50,000th download of Your Other Brothers podcast, which is super amazing.
Hold on, let me get my air horn.
You get the air horn, or like we could throw in like a clap track in the background, some cheers, some hoots, some hollers. 50,000 downloads, which is a huge number, and I'm so grateful for everyone who's listened multiple times sometimes to episodes and binge them. I mean, I get emails all the time from people who are just now discovering our podcast over 2 years later and are binging from the very beginning, and just appreciate the support. So thanks to 50,000 plus people / downloads out there that have gotten us to where we are. And wanted to read our latest collection of iTunes reviews. We have another iTunes review, which always am grateful for. This was an iTunes review from Zach, and his subject line read, "Authentic, courageous, and prof... ... So cut off at prof. So I'm assuming...
Professional.
I'm assuming he must mean professional. or prophetic.
Wait, is it an
No.
F or a PH?
It's a PH.
Oh.
Professional.
Professional with a PH, yeah. That's how the kids say it. But anyway, regardless of what he was trying to say, he says, "This is such a powerful podcast. I greatly appreciate how intense it gets and yet has me laughing at the same time. These guys are so relational in engaging a challenging conversation. I really feel the Lord's heart of compassion expressed through the content. As someone who is SSA and Christian, I have found this very encouraging and empowering in living a life surrendered to Jesus. Thank you, bros, for your courage in devotion to Jesus."
Oh, thanks, Zach.
Yeah,
Yes.
Thank you, Zach, for taking the time to reach out. And if y'all haven't already, we have over 80 iTunes reviews and ratings. We would really appreciate your support if you went over to iTunes and just dropped us a line, dropped us a few words, clicked a few stars. Ideally, 5 stars is my favorite stars quotient, but
You all realize they're free, right?
they're free.
Yeah, it's free to give us 5 stars.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't cost you anything. That'd be more challenging if it like costs you $20 a star or
Yeah,
something.
boy.
But
yeah,
it's totally free.
I'm
Yeah.
glad it's free.
Give us 5. That's always great. I've actually wanted to do this for a while. This is going to be a live experiment. So this is going to be really fun. So y'all have to react as if you don't know what's happening, because I don't know what's happening. So I've always wanted to, whenever I mean, I sort of know what's happening, but not really. I'll explain shortly. So when I go to find these iTunes reviews, I have to go to iTunes and type in Your Other Brothers to get to the Your Other Brothers like page on the podcast app of the iTunes app on my iPhone. And so when I go to the search bar, I have to type in YOUR. And so as it's doing that, it's populating suggestions for podcasts, which maybe you guys see where this is going. But as I'm typing, eventually I don't have to type the whole thing. Eventually I type a few letters and it takes me to Your Other Brothers, and I can click that and get to the link for our site feed, and then see if there's any new iTunes reviews. But I thought it'd be fun in honor of like our 50,000th download, 80 plus reviews, all this support, just to because we're now out there. Like this wouldn't have been possible when there was only 1 or 2 reviews, and I typed in YOU because iTunes doesn't know what that is. Like there's so many options. But now, thanks to all of y'all's reviews, all of your downloads, iTunes recognizes us as a presence, but only to a certain letter. So I want to do a live typing of Your Other Brothers and then announce with each letter kind of like the top few suggestions. And I think it could be humorous just to see what pops up. Because I never stopped to actually stop and see what the other things say. Because I have no idea. These could all be explicit podcasts for all I know, which that would be exciting. All right. So I'm going to type in the letter Y. Are you guys ready?
Yes.
They are so eager. Okay, so I'm going to type in the letter Y. And the first... So the first thing... Oh, this is so great. I'm so encouraged by this game already. So the first suggestion is Holy Yoga Official. Holy Yoga. That doesn't even start with Y. For some reason, that's the first one that pops up, though.
I might start using that as an expletive. Like, Holy Yoga.
Official. It's the Holy Yoga Official podcast.
Oh.
And then we have Yo-Yo Ma.
Okay.
And then we have You Made It with Pete Holmes. I think that's a notable podcast. There's Yo, Is This Racist? That's a podcast. This is so great. Your Mom's Something with Tom Segura. I don't know. It's a ... So Your Mom's Something. Yale University. They have a podcast.
Ooh.
Did you know that? And then Your Move with Andy Stanley. I feel like we're in good company if we can stay. We have Andy Stanley. His podcast also starts with Your. That's amazing.
I have a feeling we're going to be seeing him for the next 5 minutes.
He might be popping up a lot. Okay, so that's when you just type in Y. Those are all the suggestions. Now I do YO. Okay. I'm trying to see. Okay, so it's still Holy Yoga, holding it down at the top spot. Trying to see if anything else popped up. Yoga Amazing. That's now on the list. A lot of yoga out there. Yoga podcasts. You Are Not So Smart. That's a podcast. So then YOU. Okay, so now we have some eliminations. So now we have the Pete Holmes podcast at the very top. Your Move is still up there with Andy Stanley. Your Art Sucks. That's a fun podcast. I want to listen to some of these now. Stuff You Should Know. I think I've heard of that podcast.
I like the idea of the Your Art Sucks podcast just talking about a piece of visual art that the audience can't see because it's a podcast, but they're just
right.
But they're just roasting it.
I like that a lot, actually. Notice that after the first 3 letters, still no Your Other Brothers. We're still not quite at the threshold of this yet. So now when I type in R, so I have the entire word your spelled. So we have the Andy Stanley podcast. We have Your Art Sucks, You're Wrong, and Here's Why.
Wow, this
There's
is
that
all
podcast.
So much negativity.
You're Welcome, Your Money, Your Favorite Thing, Your Own Magic. Oh, Your Kick-Ass Life podcast. That sounds inspiring. Okay, so yeah, still not Your Other Brothers. I was actually curious. Now we do Your Space O. Okay, so now it's getting interesting. Now it's like very different. So now we have Your Own Magic, Your Own Health and Fitness, and at number 3, Your Other Brothers podcast. So it takes, when you get to the O of the first O and other, yeah, that's where we finally hit.
That's so exciting.
Hit the podcast list. And then others in that options, in that part of it, is your obligatory movie podcast, your online coffee break, your oxygen mask first, your online safety podcast, your opinion doesn't matter, your online destiny for success. Okay, so there you have it. And then by the time you type in T, then iTunes is like, okay, we know what you want. You want Your Other Brothers podcast. Yeah. So that's how much it takes. But I'm hoping that eventually, like, I mean, that would be the ultimate goal, is if you just type in the letter Y, like we pop up there with Andy Stanley and company.
Yeah.
But
I feel like we should throw out there that one thing our podcast offers that these other podcasts clearly don't is we think your art is great, and we think you're not an idiot. We think you're pretty smart, and we think your opinion matters. So
it does.
There we go.
Yeah, you're not gonna get disparaging comments on your art from us. We believe in the power of art and good storytelling. So anyway, however you found Your Other Brothers podcast, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for helping us to 50,000 downloads, and here's to at least 50,000 more, if not 50,000s more. Speaking of podcasts, some are aware, some maybe aren't. We've talked about it on this show at least a couple times. But we actually have a second podcast now that is making the rounds. We've done a couple episodes. It's called the YOBaLOGUE. Have y'all listened to the YOBaLOGUE?
Oh, I definitely have. I've contributed to it.
Oh, you have? That's right, Marshall. You've called in.
Yes.
Because we have a phone number now set up, which you can hear at the end of this episode. But yeah, the YOBaLOGUE, it's a bonus podcast that comes out monthly. And it sort of rehashes the last episode with the feedback that we've gotten, the comments, any emails, and listener calls as well regarding the last episode, and as well as bloopers, outtakes, which are fun, because this is much to everyone's disbelief right now. This is not a perfect process from start to finish. I hit record, it ends, and I just put it out there as it is. Like, there's a ton of editing that goes into it, and lots of content, lots of just lots of things that don't fit the episode. And then, as evidenced in our last episode, actually lots of good substantive conversation that we just can't fit into the regular episodes, because we don't want the regular episodes to be 2.5 hours long. And so this bonus podcast for our patrons, our supporters on Patreon, it's kind of this fun bonus episode that combines all of those features. And so actually stay tuned to the end of this episode. And if you're new, if you don't know what we're talking about or what this is, at the conclusion of this episode, we'll actually have a quick sampling of our most recent YOBaLOGUE episode. So if you're curious what it is, what it's all about, you can just stay tuned to the end of this episode, where it was me, Ryan, and Matthew, who was trapped in a New Mexican hailstorm in his vehicle. Somehow,
pretty intense.
Somehow he made it out alive and had a conversation with us. So yeah, stay tuned to the end of the episode for that. And moving forward, actually, this is really exciting, y'all, because I got the sense that some people had some trouble, not some trouble, but it takes a little effort maybe to listen to the YOBaLOGUE on Patreon, on our Patreon feed. It's not as convenient as it would be listening through a podcast app, whether it's the iTunes app or any other of the numerous podcast apps that are available on your phone's mobile devices. So moving forward, though, starting, I believe, with our next YOBaLOGUE coming later this month, we'll actually have a link accessible only to our Patreon supporters. We'll have a feed available to where you can download it to or you can subscribe to this new channel essentially on your mobile devices. That way it's just straight to your phone. You can subscribe. You never have to hunt and peck for it. It's just right there anytime. So
how fancy.
I know, right? So that's
Good.
fancy. That's exciting. And if you want in on that, if you want to listen to these extra episodes, all you gotta do is check out our Patreon. All the information is there at patreon.com/yourotherbros. Even $1 a month helps us out. $1 a month covers some hosting fees for our site, and so it really does make a difference. And thank you to the 100 plus of you, over 150 now actually, 150 plus people around the world supporting Your Other Brothers, and helps us do more about what we like to do. And then one last exciting announcement, exciting update from our community is also connected with our Patreon, because on Patreon we hit a new threshold very recently, and that threshold essentially tied into creating more videos for our site, for this community. And starting next month, starting in November, we're going to be putting out monthly expressions of our stories. And so that could look like testimony videos, that could look like spoken words and poetry. There's all kinds of extra creative outlets that we can take now based on where we are with our Patreon funding. So thanks to all of you who support us on Patreon. For those that have stuck with us over the months, some of you now years of us having this Patreon, it's helping us do more of what we love, and I'm excited for more videos. And breaking news, like I'm telling you guys in this room for the first time, and I'm telling the whole community. But so in November, the first video that we'll put out is a testimony video about myself and about how I came to be, essentially how we got here, talking about my roots with the Zanga community and how the generations, like the previous generation before Your Other Brothers was Zanga and this anonymous blogging community. So I'll talk a little bit about that and the books that I've written, how I've gotten to where I am currently today. And so I'm excited to put that together. I already have ideas. I'm starting to like chart it out in my head, what that's going to look like from a content basis, from a film and look creative basis. And so excited to put that together. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see what happens moving forward with new videos beyond the ones that we already do every other week. Also, I neglected to say this at the start, but it is National Coming Out Month. Hooray. Happy National Coming Out Month to everybody. It's really exciting because in this community, we have a lot of cool things coming on the site. Actually, by the time this episode is released, we've already celebrated with a video, commemorated rather with a video and a blog post conversation with some of the main authors on our site. And so the podcast now, another extension of that if you found us recently, whether you were inspired by seeing all the hashtags and all the stories online, if you found us either through the blogosphere or through the podcast or through our YouTube channel, if you're new to the community, I definitely want to welcome you and affirm that you are not alone. And that you have other people, you have other brothers who are processing through all of these things. Some further along in some ways of having communicated and told stories and shared with people, and others that are very much new and very fresh to the journey, just like many of you listening. So we welcome everyone, young and old, new and what's the opposite of new? Old?
Veteran.
Veteran, there we go. New and veteran to this community. And then seeing as we are celebrating the generations today, I'm really grateful for our sponsor who is timeless. I mean, that's when you think about the generations and you think about existing in the 50s, existing in the 60s, existing in the 70s, existing in the 80s and the 90s, and the aughts is what they called that, I think, and then the 10s, soon to be the 20s. Yeah, there are things that are just absolutely timeless, and so I just thank our sponsor, which is actually a very niche sponsor this week, this month, this episode, because our sponsor for this month is Denim Apple Pie Candles. And Denim Apple Pie Candles are timeless because those things transcend age, transcend everything.
So are these candles that smell like denim and apple
Denim?
pies
No,
at
no.
the same time?
No.
My interpretation when they reached out to us, I was a little confused as well at first when they reached out to us. But I'm pretty sure based on they sent a JPEG file attached. So what I assumed then is that it was a candle dressed in denim, but smelling of apple pie.
That's so American.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. But more than American, just timeless.
Just timeless.
Yeah, that's the key that they
Yeah.
wanted us to get across is that if you're
Intergenerational.
looking for an intergenerational, timeless classic, look no further than
Every
denim,
generation wears denim. Every
apple
generation
pie,
loves apple pie
candles.
and candles. Just
young
can't
and
go
old.
wrong.
Yeah. we've gotten we've received gifts of candles from young and old. Ryan, I think you gave us.
You
gave
gave
us
you a candle. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've gotten candles from all over. Actually, in our last video, you'll see, if you've already seen it, there are candles featured in that video. So so thank you to our sponsor. And it's funny because I went to, there was like a, because, you know, I did my due diligence. I was looking for timeless sponsors, like who could sponsor us on this episode. And thankfully, they reached out to me, the denim candle apple pie people. but I noticed that from this blog post, there is a blog post from a website called Thought Catalog, and they had like a list of 50 timeless things.
Okay.
And included among them were football and thank you notes and lace underwear and red lipstick and sex scandals. So there's all of those things.
That took an unexpected direction.
Yeah, 50 timeless things. That could be positive or it could be a little...
And it
Well,
all
clandestine.
started with football.
Indeed it did. Indeed it did. So thank you, Denim Apple Pie Candles, for sponsoring this episode of the YOBcast. All right. So as mentioned, we are talking about generations today. Generational differences, generational perspectives on issues of sexuality and masculinity. And so it's cool that we have a little bit of a diversity in this room as far as the generations go. I wish there was more, but we have what we have. Ryan, why can't you be 41 or 43?
You know, I've been trying my best. I have a very like mid-40s
That's true.
life and schedule. I feel
You
like
have a house and a job, a career. I feel like you're certainly older than I am as far as life status goes. But yeah, you have me and Ryan, who are both 31, and then Marshall, we have you as well.
Yes. I was actually born in 1959, and in this year, 2018, I am 59 years old.
59 years young, actually.
Thank you.
So what generation does that make you a part of, if we're going by the hip lingo? Like, what is that? What is it?
Boomer,
59?
baby boomer, yes.
You're a baby boomer. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And then Ryan and I, well, I'll speak for myself. I guess I would be a millennial.
Yeah, I'm also millennial. The dead giveaway is that I'm talking on a podcast about incredibly specific niche things.
What are you talking about?
See, I think that makes Marshall an honorary millennial.
That's true. Honorary millennial. Thank you for joining us on this podcast.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
We're not degrading people's art, but we are talking about Christianity and sexuality in the year 2018. So I thought it would be fun to have Ryan play a game because
All right.
Ryan's not in our Facebook group, so Ryan has no idea the results of this poll. But we put a poll out in the group to just figure out, get a beat of the pulse of our community, and just simply asking, how old are you? What is your age? And the way I split up the poll was from 18 to 29. That's
Okay.
our first category. And then essentially it's just every decade. So then it's 30s, 40s, 50s, and then 60 plus. So those were the 5 categories. So I don't know, you have a little bit of, even though you're not on Facebook, you have some interaction with our community. You were at our retreat and you were at the Revoice conference. And so you've met plenty of our supporters and readers. And obviously you're on the blog and interacting with our commenters and other listeners, I'm sure. So I'm curious to see how accurate this is. But what do you think percentage-wise? We have 131 members in our Facebook community. Most of them voted, not everybody, but I think even the ones that didn't vote, I think it would probably follow a similar trend. I'm sure there's like a statistical thing about that. What's that, standard deviation or something? I don't know.
Well, we have a
Bell
pretty good
curve.
sample.
Yeah, this is a pretty good sampling, I would say. But yeah, I was curious what you think, and then I'll reveal the actual answers. The percentages of our community are based on those age brackets. So starting with 18 to 29, what do you think?
So how many brackets were there?
There's 5 brackets,
Okay,
18 to
5
29,
brackets.
and then 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60 plus.
Okay. 18 to 29. I would guess 30%.
30%. You're actually low.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Was it 35?
You're still low.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So 18 to 29 was definitely our leading category with 43%.
Mm-hmm.
So 43% of our Yobbers community is in that 18 to 29.
Okay.
They are so youthful and excited and raring to go, but not mature yet. They don't know what's coming in this life. They're just so excited to be here. Then you have the more weathered, still youthful, but now wise and mature 30s,
Right.
which is where we are.
Yeah, the perfect balance.
Perfect
is
balance.
what I call it.
The sweet spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what percentage of our community do you think is in our 30s?
So the first one is 43.
43%.
I'm going to go with 28% for the next one.
You're still low.
Still low.
Yeah.
33%?
It is 37.
37%.
37%.
Okay.
37% of our community is in their 30s. And they are the 37% most awesome of our community. I'm so glad to be amongst them. Next up is the 40s. So notice, okay, so just if you're doing the math at home, 43% for our 18 to 29s and then 37% for our 30s. So that's already putting us at 80% of the community. So 80% of our community under the age of 40.
Wow, okay.
So that gives you a little bit of perspective. So we are a young community. But yeah, what about then the rest of the ages? What about in our 40s? What do you
In the
think?
40s. And so there's 20% left we're working
We
with.
have a 20% piece of the pie left.
I'm not sure if I've met a Yobber in his 40s. I guess I don't really ask everyone's age, so who knows.
You're on the right track.
I'm going to go with 5%.
That was really good. That was really close. Yeah. 4%. 4% of our community in their 40s. And this is something that I suspected for a while that, well, actually, I'll continue that thought after you tell me the 50s. So the 50s is our next age bracket.
10%.
Yeah, you're on the right track there as well. 13%. So
Okay.
So 13% in our 50s, in the 50s, in which Marshall is included, and then 4% for the 40s. And then I guess just to round it off, 60s plus. So that leaves us with,
I don't know.
3%.
3%.
3% plus 60 years old. So
Okay.
yeah, so this was interesting because I suspected something that looked like this. I actually didn't expect it to be quite tilted as young as it was. Maybe I was expecting a little bit more for the 40s, 50s, 60s, but I definitely knew that there was a decent amount of people in Marshall's range in the mid 50s, late 50s. I was aware of several individuals. And then as you were trying to come up with a percentage for the 40s, Ryan, I was also in my head trying to be like, wait a minute, who's like somewhere in the middle though? Like who's not in that like plentiful 20, 30 something crowd, but then who's also not up there in the 50, 60 crowd? Like who's somewhere in the middle, 40s? And truthfully, there's not, I mean, it's 4% of our Facebook group. It's not a very large percentage. And I don't know why that is. I'm racking my brain trying to figure out why we don't have as many 40-year-olds represented in our community. But that is a little snapshot.
Any 40-year-old who's not in our community, please
We
chime
need
in.
you. We need you. Yeah, please
Yes.
do. Leave us a comment. Tell us a story. If you feel so inclined, join the Yobbers group.
Speaking of comments, I do feel like the discus comments on our blog, I think that demographic breaks down differently.
Yes, no question.
I think those skew towards the older generations.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Which is really interesting to me.
Yeah, so there's this other aspect of, there's all these different like communities. We have the large Your Other Brothers blankets of authors, readers, listeners, commenters, now viewers on YouTube. We have all these different arenas for people to feel connected or to connect within this community. And so we have our Yobbers group, which tilts younger. And then I absolutely agree. I think our blog tilts a little older, which that can just be, I chalk that up to millennials have short attention spans. And if they're going to read the blog, they're certainly not going to take the time to comment on the blog, or at least as much as an older generation would. I think that's just the way of the times.
I think the advice I often give to the next generation is never look at the comments. So
right.
there you
So
go.
if you never look at the comments, then there you go. You don't have them. And then it's cool. I guess I should have done a little more research on this, but I know YouTube tends to be a younger audience as well, and we've had a few people commenting on our YouTube, and they, from what I can tell, tend to be mostly from a younger generation as well. And I wish there was a way to actually gauge the podcast, because I know we have stats that we can look at the geographies and we can see what countries and what states people are listening from, but obviously there's no way to like track their age. I wish I had more power in that regard.
Yeah.
I wish I could know who, what the ages of the people listening, because I have no idea actually what that looks like, how that breaks down as far as our listenership goes. But
call us and tell us your age. It's like the podcast version of the comments box.
Exactly.
Just the phone number. Yeah.
you can call and just tell me your age.
Just say a number and hang up.
Say one number. Yeah, that's quick and easy. Yeah, you can easily do that. If I don't get at least 70 calls that just give me numbers, just random numbers, 21, 28, 71, 38, I would be very sorely disappointed. But that's a little snapshot. I thought that would be fun to just set up this conversation that the community, by and large, tends to tilt younger, but there are definitely pockets of older people. And I've gotten emails and messages over the years just of people who are older who are asking me, is there a place for me here? Am I over the hill? Do I not belong or whatever? And to that, I would say a resounding, you certainly do belong, because there's, even at our retreat that we had in May, such a great cross-section. We did some games and some mixers, and it was such a great cross-section. I think our youngest was 19 or 20, and then our oldest was somewhere in his 60s. I think he was 63, 64 maybe. And so we had this cross-section of people, so many ages, so many eras, and so many perspectives represented. And so I'm excited to be a part of something that's so diverse. And today we're talking about sexuality as far as our generations, our perspectives go. And the first thing I wanted to dive into is just the whole concept of sexuality, the concept of coming out and telling someone that you're attracted to the same sex. What has that been like for your generation versus ours? I figured we would start with our honorary millennial in the room and get his perspective. So Marshall, as a baby boomer, as someone who grew up in the 60s and 70s, right?
Right.
What was sexuality like for you? I guess just from an outside perspective, and then you can bring in your own story, but how was sexuality perceived as you were growing up, through media, through school, careers?
Well, it really wasn't mentioned much in media. It was considered something very controversial if you had a less than or other than straight sexuality. When I was in school, if someone either admitted they were gay or even was suspected that they might be gay, they were basically the object of extreme bullying. It was something that caused everyone to fear and refuse to talk. And so because of that, and again, some of it may have been the location where I was. I was living in Florida in a culture that would be considered Southern. There was just a lot of anti-gay feelings that made it so that it was pretty much impossible to admit that you had same-sex attraction. If you didn't want to be bullied, you just held that inside. There was that mentality. Also, just in the wider culture, I would say people were just not wanting to break out of a traditional mold if they were Christians. So particularly with Christians, they didn't want to appear to be sinning. And so even though they might be struggling with, gay feelings, they would not say anything about it, because to them it would be like betraying their Christianity. They would just sort of be ashamed of it and hold it inside. So it was a very difficult time. And I was actually talking to Ryan about this before the podcast started.
Well, you
But
guys did not hit the record button on your lapel mics at the time. You should have been doing that. But continue. What were you talking about with Ryan?
was that things were even to the extreme when it came to refusing to come out, that sometimes if someone was afraid of coming out, the only time that they could be motivated to actually say something was if they were attracted to another man and wanted to have a sexual encounter, they would be forced to admit that yes, they had gay feelings. And so people would associate coming out with, you only talked about it when you were trying to arrange a sexual encounter. And so there was this mentality that if I ever confessed it, the person who hears it is going to think that I'm attracted to them and I'm trying to have a sexual encounter. And so, of course, people avoided it even more because of that mentality that went along with it. It was that extreme in some ways.
It's really interesting because Ryan, we're like on that crossover generation. So we're part of the millennials, and I guess the lingo now is that the one below us is Generation Z, people born essentially after 2000. And so, I mean, you can correct me if it's a different experience from you, but my perspective of sexuality growing up was that it still was kind of taboo. Like maybe not so much. Like you had shows like Will and Grace, or you had other shows that were starting to introduce gay characters, but it was still kind of like more of a joke, kind of silly, a little more extreme. The examples represented in media. All the politicians would say that they believed marriage was between a man and a woman, Democrat, Republican, whatsoever. And so there's still very much a little bit of a bent against homosexuality. Like it was starting to become a little more known, a little more. You had other figures like Ellen DeGeneres, and you had other figures starting to break out in media. But for the most part, it's still kind of hush-hush, a minority experience growing up. And then somewhere along the way, in the 2000s, obviously gay marriage got legalized in America a few years ago. But there definitely was a shift in the latter stage of my experience in my years. Whereas a Generation Z perspective, they're kind of growing up more with this whole mindset. It would have been cool actually to have a Generation Z person on this show, because that would have been cool to like hear how does an 18-year-old view sexuality, because I'm sure even it doesn't seem that much of a difference, but from a 31-year-old to an 18-year-old's perspective, I bet there is a lot of maybe some dramatic, but maybe a lot of subtle nuance differences as far as perception on sexuality. But was it different for you? Because I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and then I grew up in super conservative Georgia, and so maybe my experience in conservative Georgia was maybe tilted by this perspective. But what about you?
I think that's very accurate. I think our generation, when we were growing up and going through these formative years, there was kind of a lot of rapid change happening in culture, and certainly like different parts of the country and different cultural contexts were changing, or are changing at different rates. And so growing up, there was one high school I went to where someone like came out and founded the GSA, the Gay Straight Alliance, and I remember I imagine people bullied him, but I do remember like people gave him a really hard time behind his back, and there was just a lot of homophobia there. But then I went to a different high school that had a much more progressive culture within it, and there were people at that high school who were pretty free in identifying as various LGBT identities, and so there was like a much, I feel like for me at least, the places where it was safe or accepted to talk about your sexuality, like there were places where it was and there were places where it wasn't, and and so it was just a time of a lot of change.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to read this comment, Marshall, and then get your perspective, your take on it. But we put this out to our YOBers group, as we always do when we do these podcasts, and we got some really great comments from our community there on Facebook. And here's what one of our YOBers had to say about where he grew up and the culture of his time. He said, "Technically, my birth date classifies me a boomer. Like many younger boomers, I tend to identify more with Generation X, and my closest friends are Gen Xers. And yet, I am stuck in a generation in which my peers have many attitudes I detest, and I can't really pretend I am not affected by those attitudes. I was just a little kid during the social unrest of the 1960s, and the sexual revolution was part of that. This new attitude about sexuality, if it feels good, do it, seemed very liberating for quote-unquote worldly people. Conservative Christians had good reason to be concerned about the direction the culture was heading, but their reaction to it was sometimes unhealthy. In my upbringing, at least what I picked up from my dad, who was also my pastor, there was a lot of fear and shame associated with sexuality and all of its aspects. I actually grew up thinking sex was dirty. Though I occasionally heard other Christians talk about the beauty and the good of sex in marriage, and largely embraced what they said as believable and true, the idea that sex was dirty was so deeply imprinted that it stayed with me long into adulthood. In some ways, the fact that I wasn't attracted to girls helped me believe that narrative even more. But that kind of shameful view of sexuality also drove me into a deep emotional underground when I realized I was attracted to guys. So I'm curious from the first part of that comment, Marshall, what's like your relationship with Generation X? Because I guess there's a little bit of a gap there between baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, millennials. Here we are now. Like, what's your tie-in to those generations?
Well, again, the typical attitude in my generation was it's shameful, you keep quiet about same-sex attraction. And there's a lot more openness to it, which I appreciate. So I certainly resonate with it. And of course, obviously, I'm talking about it, so I act more like I'm from Generation X or younger. But I don't see a disconnect between myself and people that are younger because we're human and we're living in the same world. But the way it was very different from what it is now.
What is like so I'm curious because there are a lot of people that are older. We're going to probably get to this later in this episode when we talk about modern constructs and concepts. And I know, Marshall, you live with a bunch of younger people.
Yes.
You're in this community, like you're our oldest author, and most of our authors are in our 20s and 30s. And so I'm sure you interact with a ton of young people.
Yes.
And you have a knack, I think, for connecting and for not being like holier than thou or like the all you young whippersnappers like wagging your finger. But like, what is, because there are some people though that are like that who are older, and why do you think you're not like that?
It may be that I'm just compassionate, again, Enneagram 2, that I understand people, I care about them, and I think there's more compassion in people that are younger for whatever reason.
So you think millennials are, on the whole, more compassionate than your
yes.
generation?
It may be, at least with what's outwardly expressed, visibly expressed, yes.
Yeah. Well, that carries more weight coming from you than it would from me. So, I'll just say, I could say that, but if you say that, then I'm going to take your word for it.
Very often people, there's a mentality that is fading from our society, and some of it's good, some of it's bad, but it's just being tough and not letting pain stop you from accomplishing things. Well, some of that's good, but sometimes people would take that and they would tell everyone else to, basically shut up and do what you're supposed to do and don't whine. That mentality was common where I came from, rather than just helping people who are breaking down because life is difficult. I think there's a time and place to be tough, but certainly it was overdone in my generation.
I wanted to ask you, Marshall, we're kind of hanging out in your generation at the start of this podcast, but I was curious because someone else commented, he's also a baby boomer. I had no idea this was a thing. Can you confirm this? That he was saying that...
What is boofing?
No, that is not what I was going to ask. Okay, so this guy who's the baby boomer, another baby boomer, he said, as for coming out, that was a dangerous thing to do. Depending on where you were raised, you had to be careful who and how you talked to. There were bandana codes, signals, words you'd use to make sure the guy you were talking to was gay and not a straight guy, luring you into a beatdown. And so I was like, and he posted a picture. I was like really confused by this. I'd never heard of this. Were there people that wore like different colored bandanas to signify what their sexuality was? Was it like a secret code? But there's like no internet to translate all this information. How do people know?
The only thing I know how to communicate in bandana code is I don't know what to do with this bandana.
Right. Like, how do you tie the thing? How do you keep it fixed onto your body? Yeah.
Well, I do know that in different regions, different cities, at different times, there were patterns of dress and also patterns of speaking and that were associated with gay men. And there were often things like they used to joke about it, that if you had an earring, you were suspect, but if it was on one side, it was okay. If it was on the other side, that meant you were gay. And I can't even remember which side was which, but this was in quite a few years ago. There were just there was a certain gay slang that was never heard in the general population. And if you would throw in a few words that would mean something with the gay slang, people would catch that. There were all kinds of clues and hints that were part of the process of people getting...
Yeah. Maybe, like, back then, people were probably just way more intuitive and attuned to those things without the internet to force feed you and to, like, give you more of an outlet. I think people probably had to be more creative, for lack of a better word.
Well, they had to intuitively figure out whether a guy might be gay before they talked to them, because, as I said, people would often assume if you admit that you are gay, that was a way of saying, I want a sexual encounter with you. And people would interpret it that way. So in certain contexts, so you wouldn't ask that just because it would, or you wouldn't say that because people would see it that way. So, of course, there were all these hints dropped. And then when you recognize the hints and the other person recognizes the hints, then someone might confess, and then the other person confessed, and unfortunately, then that often led to sin.
So, what was your bandana color choice?
No, I literally didn't learn those details deliberately because I did not want to participate in a sexual encounter. I was a Christian and was wanting to resist the temptation, and if I didn't know the slang and the what color to wear of what item, then I wouldn't come across as gay to someone, and they wouldn't hit on me in
so
the ways.
your bandana was clear, transparent.
I never carried a bandana around. I never wore a bandana, whatever. No.
Gotcha.
Such an intricate and complex, like, cultural experience phenomenon.
Yeah, like, I was thinking the other day about how, you know, as I've been driving, I mentioned all the travels I've been taking and how much I'm constantly using my phone for GPS and getting me places with GPS. When, as little as a decade ago, that was not doable. It was not I was not able to travel with a GPS 10 years ago, and that's just getting from sometimes just like 10 minutes away. Like, I punch something in and I want to go there. And so now the whole concept of not navigating the roads, but navigating my sexuality without that technology in place, that's so interesting.
Our generation traded in the bandanas in code words for RuPaul gifts.
That's true.
It's a little sad.
But it's even true that today, if I said the name RuPaul, my straight friends wouldn't know who that is.
Really? I feel like RuPaul is...
I have straight friends who literally don't know who RuPaul is.
RuPaul is a known figure, right?
Yeah, I know.
RuPaul just won an Emmy for the show. What's it called?
RuPaul's Drag Race.
RuPaul's Drag Race, yeah. Congratulations, RuPaul.
Shout out to RuPaul.
Shout out to Ru. Yeah.
We know you're listening.
We know you're listening. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to read some younger perspectives too, because we have plenty of millennials in the group. Even though they don't comment as often on our blog, they very much are active in our Facebook group community. Because, you know, all the kids are on Facebook. Well, actually, many of them are leaving Facebook now because their parents are on Facebook. Yeah. But that's beside the point.
I was going to say, this is unusual that the Facebook group slants so younger than...
Yeah. I wonder when Facebook is obsolete in 10 years, I wonder what that's going to mean for our community. Anyway, we'll see. 24-year-old millennial here. I guess here are the things I've observed. On topics of sexuality and coming out. Being a millennial, there are many more resources available to me via the internet on topics regarding sexuality and coming out. I guess before the internet, people only had input based on their immediate community and mainstream media. I remember watching coming out videos on YouTube and being able to train myself on how to come out through those people. There were only a few videos available when I started searching for them. More videos popped up as time passed until I thought I finally had enough research experience on possibilities of reactions to other people coming out. So I would also know how to properly respond if ever I get one of those reactions, and I was able to position myself in a way that I'd be able to engage with good conversation with whatever reaction I got. I also remember reading my first SSA-related book on my iPad. And lastly, I had access to blogs and online communities such as this one, Your Other Brothers, to the point that I flew to the other side of the world with the sole purpose of meeting these people I met online and hear more about their stories. I guess that's one additional thing, better access to international transportation. Basically, I've had access to a number of resources, even though I still think there's not enough. Being able to compare different sets of belief systems, being able to hear other people's personal stories, and most importantly, being able to feel that I am not alone.
Yeah, I think the internet has played a huge role in the change of cultural outlook and the attitudes around homosexuality, because non-straight people have been able to connect a lot better and find each other a lot more easily through the internet. And I mean, we've talked about that sometimes on Your Other Brothers, about how, how amazing it is. And I've said this before, as much as I kind of hate the internet, I also love the internet, because without it, I wouldn't have met you guys.
Right. That is very true. None of us would have met each other.
Yeah. The internet has done wonders to filter our relationships, because it used to be, your relationships were proximity based, and it was wherever you lived, your school, your career, your family, your neighborhood. And to some extent, we've lost something. I think there's something beautiful in that we have this proximity-based community and relationship. But then the internet has done this new thing where it's now we're able to filter out, or we're trying to filter toward what are our values? What are the things we most value in a relationship, in a person, in a human being? What are similar belief systems? What are similar hobbies and interests? Certainly, But yeah, in the last decade of being online, starting anonymously and now slowly but surely putting stories out there and connecting with folks, you guys included, and just again at the start of this show, talking about traveling all over the country, meeting our readers, meeting these friends now in my life, it's done wonders for the conversation and the view on sexuality. And obviously the culture's gone a completely different way from where it was in the baby boomers generation. But, it goes one way, but then it also opens up conversations that weren't able to be had in the church. And, we're still, I think, a long ways away from getting to where I'd like to see the church get to as far as conversations about sexuality. But I think we're further along than we've ever been. And the internet has, a huge role in that. And then we had this other perspective from the millennials, not to be outdone. He says, the millennial generation started on January 1st, 1984. So, I made it in by 6 weeks, for better or worse.
Webster's defines millennial as...
We're getting very technical. I actually had no idea when millennials started. I knew it was around mid-80s, but I didn't know what if someone out there defined it. Who defines these things anyway? Is there Anyway, according to this Yobber, which I trust him, that this is the truth, that this is when the millennials started. 1984. I like to think of myself as an elder amongst the millennial kiddos. I think my generation has accelerated the shift from the cultural acceptability of public faith and private sexuality to one of private faith and public sexuality. And we are reaping all of those so-called benefits of the sexual revolution, be it higher divorce rates, more infidelity, porn on demand 24/7, less children born to married moms and dads, the Holocaust of the unborn, more STDs, more sexual violence, gender and sexuality confusion, and the list goes on and on. It would be exponentially easier and more acceptable for a teenager to tell his Christian parents that he is gay or trans than it would be for a teenager to tell his secular progressive parents that he is a Christian. The former would be publicly embraced as a hero, the latter as a pariah. So yes, coming out is much more culturally easy now, but at what cost? The pressure, once you come out, to adhere to the new postmodern sexual ethic is enormous. Shame is never helpful, and no one is advocating a world where we cannot be authentic with our stories and struggle. But it is inordinately more difficult to battle a sin that is now widely recognized as a virtue, and it's only getting harder. What do y'all think about that? I think there's a lot of legitimate stuff there.
Yeah.
I liked how he talked about public faith, private sexuality versus private faith, public sexuality. I think in certain pockets, I don't know that I would necessarily agree that across the board. I think there are parts of the country where that's not necessarily true, but maybe.
What do you think, Marshall? Is there, like, do you feel a sense of, like, the good old days of virtue and morality, like, from your childhood, like, back?
Right. Are we a rotting nation now?
Yeah.
Well, there has been much less Christian influence now than there once was. No question about it. Where people, when I was a child, would refer to this as a Christian nation, and I don't hear people saying that anymore for obvious reasons.
Do you think it's actually gotten less Christian, though?
Oh, are there fewer people with genuine faith? That's hard to say. But people are, I would say there's probably less genuine Christian faith than there once was. But there are, that is very hard to measure.
Yeah.
But it seems that way, yeah.
I guess I'm always skeptical of the viewpoint that says, oh, like, America in such and such era of the past was good and wholesome and pure.
There were problems. It was certainly not.
Yeah, like, I think it's...
There are all kind of underlying problems that were not Christian.
Right. It's easy and tempting sometimes maybe to, like, ignore the problems in the past or sweep them under the rug, just because people struggled with their sexuality privately. Like, I don't think that's innately better. I don't think that's innately better than, like,
I think
dealing with it publicly.
Depends who you talk to. Like, I think if you talk to plenty of people, our generation included, I think if you talk to us about our experience, our faith with regard to our sexuality today versus if we grew up 50 years ago, would we have been better off in that America versus this America? I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think for my own life. If I grew up 50 years ago without all of the resources and connections that I've made through the internet, and I lived in Marshall's culture, or even prior to that, would I have felt as comfortable or secure in my faith and my journey, my spirituality, knowing that I had all these things that I couldn't talk about with anybody? And so I don't know that would have necessarily been the case. And so I don't know, it's interesting, just the shifting tides, because on the one hand you could look at where America is today versus where it was and say that it's gotten worse, and depending who you talk to or where you go, you could argue that there's still authentic Christians. It's not like authentic faith has disappeared, but maybe it just looks different now.
Or, like, take for example the idea of increasing divorce rate and more marriages falling apart, and I guess I'm suspicious that, like, marriages in the past 50 years, like, I just don't think the church has had a clear, accurate biblical view of marriage in the past 50 years, and I do wonder if marriages falling apart is kind of a symptom of that, rather than specifically, like, moral decline of our culture. Like, was it kind of rotten from the beginning, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, there was a lot more hidden in the past that was wrong, and people would stay together because they didn't want to be shamed by their friends or just society in general. So they would stay together even though they were they had, to put it mildly, a very bad marriage. There were many people in that category before, and nowadays they would just be divorced.
Yeah.
So there's some of that, but I can't certainly speak for why, other than just there does seem to be some form of spiritual decline. I will say that there's less Christian influence, no question.
So what you're saying, Marshall, is that we need to make America great again. Is that what you're saying?
I do not like to use those words. There are enough people mad at me for enough good reasons. I don't want to start getting into politics and getting real anger.
It's just really interesting, yeah.
Well, the running joke is how, like, millennials are killing things. Millennials killed the banking industry. Millennials killed mortgages.
Blockbuster.
Millennials killed Blockbuster. I think millennials killed marriage.
That's a hot take. Yeah. Ryan's hot takes. Yeah. Well, I'm curious. We actually talked about this. Marshall, you were on our pornography episode.
Yes, I was.
I wanted to do a quick, we don't necessarily have to repeat that conversation, but it's worth noting that when you talk about sexuality, when you talk about pornography and promiscuity, there are very clear differences from your generation and our generation.
Yes.
So I was curious, could you do a quick recap of, I'm sure plenty of people have already listened to this episode, but that was so long ago. When did you record that? That was like last year.
Maybe a year ago.
But like, what was your experience, both personally with pornography, but then also the cultural view at large? Like, did friends ever talk about it? Did you ever hear about it passed around? I'm curious, from your experience in the 60s and 70s, what that looked like versus today.
Well, when I was younger, the first time I actually saw pornography was very straight pornography. It was Playboy, and it wasn't
Hot take.
it wasn't voluntary. It was because one of my classmates, I think it was in 6th grade, they were sneaking around with the Playboy magazine and then just sort of showing it to different people in the class, other guys. And, they basically, I walked by as I looked over somebody's shoulder and saw what it was. But again, it was usually in the form of something like that where people would hide it, but unless it was in a sneaky adolescent thing where, look, I have pornography. It was sort of something people would brag about, but society in general looked down upon. You had to go to a place that would sell either pornographic magazines or later on videos. You would have to go to an actual adult video store, adult bookstore. Some places there were convenience stores that would sell it, but you'd have to ask at the desk, and if it was an embarrassing thing. So it put up a barrier that made it so I never went after and bought pornography. Now, admittedly, I knew I was attracted to men, and gay pornography was even more under wraps.
So you didn't go up to the grocery clerk and said, I'd like a issue of...
Is there such thing as Playgirl?
There was, as we all know, there is such a thing, and that was around later, but I will just say that it was so embarrassing and so difficult. I certainly never tried anything like that, and most people would not. It put up a barrier that helped people not have access to pornography.
Ryan, if you lived in the 60s and 70s, could you ever see yourself going to a grocery clerk and asking for a pornography magazine?
I would absolutely crumble to dust.
I know. I'm just trying to picture in my most desperate hour, if I was so desperate to look at that stuff, could I ever do that? And admittedly, I've looked at pornography on the internet, but I can't imagine mustering that strength to do that. I don't know.
What people would literally do, it was a joke at the time, but people would literally, flip their collar up. If they had a hood, they'd put the hood on. They'd wear glasses. They'd go into another neighborhood, usually in a bad part of town, and go into the store and try to make sure no one knew they were there. It was that kind of sneakiness.
Wow. Yeah, that's so different from our current state of affairs right now. Yeah, one of our yobbers commented on this shift. He said that someone asked me a couple weeks ago, what will be this century's cigarettes? That is something that just about everyone thought was either good for you or no big deal, but then it turns out it will kill them. I told them the complete sexualization of our culture and the Herculean efforts we have undertaken to have instantaneous 24/7 access to pornography and sexual partners. And I don't know, it's going to be interesting to see like where the years ahead take us, because this is all still very new and unfolding. Like to have all this access, even as a kid growing up with dial-up internet, like there was and having like one central family computer, no cell phones, no laptops, like it was very hard to access those things. And whenever I had this, like when I was on the family computer, I remember one time like trying to look up shirtless pictures of like actors or something. It was very secret, it was very quick, it was very shameful, it was very quick in the sense that I was constantly looking over my shoulder and making sure no one in my family was behind me. But then it's like with dial-up internet, you're using the phone line, so you're blocking the phone line. Nobody can call the house, and you're waiting like 30 seconds to 2 minutes waiting for this picture to like line by line slowly download and materialize on your screen.
There's definitely no video.
No video, absolutely not. Yeah, it was just still images at that point. And so to go from that to where we are today now, and kids have cell phones, kids have iPads. Some kids have 3 devices. They'll have the computer and the family computer and the iPad and the cell phone, and they can close the door. They can be alone in their room with it. They can, they don't have to worry about a parent looking over their shoulder. Now, of course, there can be, web monitoring and stuff like that. But it's just a very different mindset and approach to the internet now, and it's so available, and like, where is that going to take us? Even in just 15 years, there's such a dramatic shift in the technology and the access to it, and where is that going to take us 15 years from now? And you go to the end of the millennial generation, the end of the Generation Z, 60, 70, 80 years from now, where are we going to be? Yeah, so the pornography is one thing, and we can bounce back to the baby boomer generation too, but as far as promiscuity goes, as far as hookups and meetups with people for sexual encounters, like, today, someone commented, I forget where it was, but someone commented in the group that it's like within minutes, like literally you could post something on your phone and within minutes, not even hours, not even days, but within minutes, you can have a sexual encounter with somebody in your city, in your neighborhood. And it's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of crazy that's the access is so quick and easy. But I'm curious from the baby boomer perspective, like, what did that look like? I mean, were you aware of it, Marshall, or?
Yes, largely because my brother was openly gay in the same college town that I lived in, and I saw some of it, and my brother admitted that he was very promiscuous. And I heard some of the stories there from him, and basically what someone had to do to have a sexual encounter, normally they would have to go to certain places that had reputations among the gay population of being meeting places for sexual encounters. There were certain buildings at the University of Florida that had bathrooms that were open at night when there were no students on the outside, or there were no people walking around, and people would go into those public restrooms to have sexual encounters or to meet each other and go from there. There were gay clubs, there were, dance clubs. There were one or two in the college town where I was from, and they were actually known among gays, straights, everyone. So if I as a man were to walk in there, everyone would automatically start assuming that I was gay, and it was, you had your cover was blown. But the point is, though, that people would, go to these gay clubs or these more secret meeting places and have sometimes literally anonymous encounters with people. They didn't know their names, whatever. And there were people that were very promiscuous. I definitely knew of one. Well, to be honest, it was my brother, admitted that he had over 100 partners, just using those methods. But he would, again, frequent these meeting places that were not especially known to the general population. He wouldn't go to the public clubs. He would sneak around in these other places. Obviously, there were no apps on phones, no websites that you could use to meet each other.
Yeah, it actually reminds me, as I was thinking about apps and websites and just access to other people who are seeking same-sex sexual encounters. Like, I remember one time traveling, and I was staying at a friend's house in some of my travels. This was years ago, and this friend had a roommate, and like, the roommate was nice. He was a nice guy. It was very obvious upon meeting him that he was also attracted to men, and so that was fairly clear. But made even more so, beyond gestures and mannerisms and general intuition, the fact that he was on his phone the whole time, and like, it was pretty obvious to know what he was doing, and to catch side glances of his phone and to see the messages going back and forth, and to like recognize layouts of the sites or the apps. Like, it was very, very clear, and it wasn't, I don't know, I didn't get the sense that he was trying to necessarily hide it. And it was, I think, in conversations with my friend, I think it was very clear that, like, yeah, he's, having these conversations. It's not like a big secret or anything. And I'm just thinking, as you were talking, Marshall, there's like such a contrast from decades ago, where you had to be super intentional to go out of your way to go to these places to meet people. And now, like, someone can literally be like having a conversation with you in a living room or at a restaurant, and also be like in this other world doing their own thing on their cellular device. It's such a contrast. So I put it out there to the Yobbers because I wanted to get a feel for the differences. Like, on the one hand, we're all believers. We all have a traditional sexual ethic in this community, but very, as Marshall, you can attest, very vast differences sometimes in how we express our sexuality with our faith, and different just modern constructs and realizations of that. And so things like the gay Christian label, that's something that comes up. And we don't need to go into another big, long labels discussion because we've done a podcast about it. We've had numerous blog posts about it. They tend to devolve into just one side screaming at the other that this is the right label, and then the other side saying, no, that's not, and et cetera, et cetera. But I thought this comment was very insightful from a baby boomer. He said, the boomer generation claims to be the generation that threw off the judgmentalism of their parents' generation. Mm-hmm. But because we wanted to do things our way, we only ended up being even more judgmental in return, which I'm going to ask Marshall for your perspective on that in a second. But continuing with this comment, he goes on and says, that's why I'm an admirer of both Gen Xers and millennials. I see a lot more openness to people and more willingness to understand where people are coming from and withhold judgment. When I was growing up, there was no such thing as a gay Christian, quote unquote. That would have been an oxymoron. So I had to pretend I was something else. But it seems there's a lot more openness now to accepting your sexuality. And while that can lead to other problems, like the acceptance of gay sex, the idea that you can be gay or SSA without shame is something I wish had been possible for me growing up. So firstly, Marshall, what are your thoughts on, I'm curious, I was really fascinated by that concept that your parents were judgmental, according to this person, on the whole, which then made you not want to be, but then actually made you be more judgmental. Because that is the millennials' concept of our parents' generations, that they're pretty judgmental.
Marshall, can you explain why you're so judgmental?
We're the perfect case for this.
Now, I've had many people say that I'm not judgmental, but we'll see. The point, though, is that very often parents were judgmental. I mean, again, my parents, specifically me, my exact situation, not the culture as a whole, my parents were silent on it, mostly because they considered it so shameful they didn't want to speak out loud about anything related to homosexuality. So I was not judged by their words. I was just kept in silence. I would say that what I did hear was judgmental, but it was not from my parents. And I certainly knew that this was something, again, my parents considered so horrible they couldn't talk about it because of their embarrassment. Mm-hmm. So I was, very cautious when it came to talking about it myself. It didn't make me want to be judgmental, but again, my parents weren't judgmental, they were just silent. Mm-hmm. But I would say others that I knew whose parents were judgmental, often they were the people would become judgmental with those who were judgmental. And you see this sort of in culture today, like, people who are very culturally liberal will complain against conservatives that they're judgmental, that they're telling me how to live morally. But then they will be judgmental of those who are perceived as judgmental. See what I mean? There's a different kind of judgmentalism. It's just focused on something different. So that's how someone can be judgmental over, even though they're trying not to be judgmental like their parents were. They are judgmental just over a different subject.
So I need to get your hot take, and you can be as brief as you'd like, because there was a then sort of this back and forth discussion that happened from this comment about that label, the gay Christian label, and essentially one side saying you can't use it ever, and then one side saying that it's okay, it's not that big of a deal. But coming from your perspective, either personally or just your generation, I feel like generationally, at least within the Christian context, gay Christian, I understand that gay Christian on the whole, from an older generation, is not as readily accepted. Right. And in many cases, the complete opposite or the complete extreme of that is vitriolic, no, you cannot call yourself that. It's essentially in some cases, essentially condemning yourself to hell. If you're in certain constructs of the country, of the culture, that a Christian can't call himself that, physically, mentally, spiritually can't equate himself with that. But what is, I guess, your perspective on on that label, on that term, how millennials tend to use it more. I mean, there are older people who use it too. I've met plenty of older people who also identify as gay Christian, but what do you think?
Well, again, the mentality was always that was an oxymoron, that if you were a Christian, you couldn't be gay, and if you were gay, you couldn't be a Christian. Because gay, I think the summary of it is gay used to mean not just having feelings of same-sex attraction, it meant engaging in gay sex. And so the meaning of the word gay has really changed, so that now when people hear gay, they think of, well, this person is attracted to the same sex, and maybe they've adopted certain cultural things, but it doesn't necessarily mean, again, among millennials, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is actively involved in sexual relationships. But someone who's older, it implies that. And so what happens is people, if you take on a label, if someone were to say they are a gay Christian, it implies that they are literally involved in gay activity. So you don't want to take on that label. You're calling yourself by a sin name and saying, this is what I am. I'm this kind of sinner. And that you're saying that that's what identifies you. And of course, as a Christian, I don't want to be identified by the sin that I want to leave behind, which is the gay activity. I do want to be known by being a Christian. So I don't myself call myself gay because, especially among people my age, but certainly among other Christian groups of people even younger, that implies gay sex also, which I don't want people to misunderstand and think that I'm involved.
I'm curious, Marshall, do you think if you were a millennial, if you grew up in a millennial, no, let's actually put you in Gen Z. If you were growing up Gen Z, do you think...
Snapchatting all your friends.
Yeah, you're Snapchatting all the time. I'd love to Marshall on Snapchat.
No, I've never been on Snapchat.
I don't know, this is a cool thought experiment. Do you think, not that you necessarily would use the gay Christian label, but would you admit maybe that you'd be more likely, that it could be more likely that you'd use that phrase just
of course it's more likely
in a
because
different culture. Yeah,
because I wouldn't see the word the same way.
Yeah. And that's completely understandable. Like, that's a completely rational explanation. Like, I'm not gonna say, that's one of my big pet peeves. I think, Ryan, you might have mentioned this at one point. I don't necessarily want people telling me to use it, but I want people to tell me not to use it as well. Like, I want the freedom to be able to use it or not use it depending on the situation. Like, I kind of just feel weird feelings when someone says you can't describe yourself this way, or you can't use this word to talk about yourself in this way, or to this group of people, or to this person or that person. And but I think, like, growing up with that as your cultural foundation, like, it's completely understandable why you and why plenty of people, the 40s plus crowd in our community, have a harder time with that word. Like, it's completely understandable because it was a different time, it was a different era, and I just hope we can find some common ground with realizing that the word has changed,
right, and
just being sensitive to other people's backgrounds and where they come from with it.
I had a really eye-opening conversation with my mom. Shout out to Mom. And it was back when I first started talking to my parents about all this, and she had some questions, or just was curious about why I had chosen to describe myself as gay sometimes, or why I had sometimes just decided to describe myself as gay, and I explained to her, yeah, it just means that I'm attracted to men, and it doesn't mean that I'm, like, trying to have sex with men or whatever. And she was like, oh, okay, well, now that you explain that, like, that makes sense, but you have to realize that to my generation, gay is a synonym for promiscuous. And that was kind of something I hadn't really realized or thought about before. And it was helpful to kind of frame a lot of the conflicts that I see in our community about language and terminology. And I think people in my generation, if I tell them I'm gay and they think I'm trying to have sex with men, like, those are the people who assume that are the people who are just assuming that we're all trying to have as much sex as possible.
Which I am not.
Right.
Me neither, of course.
No, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just have to, like, it's good to have a conversation like this and just step back and realize how language is alive and constantly moving toward things and away from things. And this one word, you know, obviously, like, we read those books in literature classes where the word gay would come up, and it wouldn't mean any of this. It would mean gay. It would mean extremely joyful, extremely happy and delighted. It wouldn't mean any of the stuff that we put. Does that change your reading of Charles Dickens?
I was really confused all through middle school.
Yeah, these little Gen Zers today reading Charles Dickens, they have no idea what's going on. They're interpreting it entirely wrong. So it's helpful. It's helpful to be aware that language is changing. And again, another 50 years from now, it's gonna be interesting when the baby boomers are all gone, and when now the millennials are like the old guard. I'm curious what the relationship with this word and what the view of all this is going to be. Like, I'm fascinated by language and culture constantly changing over the years.
And a while back, I read a study of British teenagers, so people who I guess would be in their very early 20s right now, but a study on the way they think of LGBT identities, and they saw a big increase in the number of people who just were kind of rejecting these labels, and they like didn't want to identify as gay or lesbian or bi. They were just like, I am what I am. You know, sometimes I'm attracted to men some of the time and whatever. And this is, it's just like they see themselves much more as individuals instead of, the people in this study saw themselves much more as just individuals instead of, being under this umbrella or category.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I'm like curious to see how people identify moving forward, because I think I get the sense that the new generation is kind of just like y'all need to get over yourselves. Like life is so much more than a sexuality, a choice, a word, a label. I'm excited to see where that goes. That's really fascinating to me. So Marshall.
Uh-oh, this is sneaky. What is it?
What do you think about cuddling?
Oh, don't ask me that.
I did. You're on this episode.
Oh, I'm on the spot.
Yeah, I want to know.
You put me on the spot.
On the spot. You knew this question was coming. What is the generational perspective on cuddling? Or actually,
what's the official baby boomer position on cuddling?
Is it side hugs? Is it footsie? What is it? I'm curious though, in all seriousness, just like the perception of, because Marshall, you've been around in various circles. I mean, you obviously have your church and your community back home, but I've seen you involved in like our retreats that we've had, which are predominantly younger people, and the younger people tend to be physically affectionate with hugging or sitting close together on a couch or what have you. And I've always actually been curious. This will be like my first time actually even asking you about this, but like, what is your perspective on physical touch? And you can call it cuddling, you can call it whatever you want. Okay. I'm not a huge fan of that word personally myself. It's a weird word. But what do you think about it?
Well, first of all, just the society in general, when I was growing up, would look on, a man should not be too physically affectionate with another man, or they'd be suspected of being gay, which was so horrible at the time that most people would avoid it because they were scared that people would think they were gay, even if they weren't. So there's this, among my generation, there's an avoidance of that so that it wouldn't be, as to use a phrase that I've heard in Christian churches, the appearance of evil. So there's always been that in a cultural thing with my generation. Now, that's obviously changing. Society is changing so that there is more, you're not assumed to be gay if you hug another man. And, that it is not your relative. But even when I was in high school, among Christians, there was more hugging that went on, between men and men, men and women, that was not considered sexual. And, hugging is something that shouldn't be put in the same category as some of these other things we were hinting at. I think that is something that, in the right context, has always been done, especially among Christians in certain church groups. But when you get to other aspects of physical touch, there's just more caution among my generation. I personally do have significant boundaries there. I will hug virtually anyone. Now, sometimes I've been joked with that I overdo the side hug instead of a front hug. But I do hug, and I think that that's very good and appropriate, a way to express affection that would not be misunderstood. But there are times when I hold on to the hug longer than many people feel comfortable, and I don't think there's any reason to worry about that. I think that's fine. There are times when I will sit right next to someone, and I don't see it as wrong, and as long as they don't see it as wrong, but when you get much beyond that, sometimes I'm less comfortable, and I don't want to do anything close to something sexual. So I do tend to keep my boundaries physically somewhat close like that. But
And when you're talking about these situations, are you talking about with younger people? Or are you in your head? Are you picturing people your own age when you have these like interactions, whether it's hugs or sitting close together, whether they're also SSA or gay identifying or not?
it depends on the individual, whatever the individual feels comfortable with. Most men my age don't feel comfortable sitting close to me, so I won't. Most men my age, even if they're same-sex attracted, don't feel comfortable sitting that close to me, so I won't. They often will feel comfortable with a certain type of hug, especially if you pat 3 times after. But that's the joke. But
The pat makes what happened previously okay. Like
That's
whatever
like,
happened
that's
in the
like
past is in the past.
the anti-bandana code.
it's the so-called, well, people have all kind of jokes about a bro hug. You have to tap the right way.
It's the bro tap.
Right.
Yeah.
But the point is that, whatever people feel comfortable with, I believe in showing appropriate affection in ways that the person that I'm wanting to show affection to will feel comfortable with. And if they don't feel comfortable, I'm not going to even hug them if they don't want a hug. There's certainly some people, especially for whatever reason, younger women will not want me to hug them because they will, they perceive that as a type of sexual harassment or something. Certain women, I'm not even speaking in general, just a few, I've had that reaction. So, I'm very cautious, especially with those who might misunderstand. So it all depends on who I'm dealing with. But it's very common. Again, men my age won't they will do a type of hug, but just side or bro hug.
I mean, Ryan, you can share your experience too, but like from my perspective, I've been in this weird SSA Christian world now for 10 years, and especially in person for the last 5 or 6, like regularly meeting in large gatherings, smaller gatherings, one-on-one, smaller groups, and definitely a higher level of physical touch than I noticed in just in my general worlds of church and church culture. But I don't know, also experiencing more and more freedom to just have conversations about those expressions of touch. And it doesn't have to be, like, it could be a little awkward, sure, but it doesn't have to stay that way. And it can be comfortable. It can be, in many ways, a step forward for the friendship. And it can be very productive just to talk about what is okay, what is just not, what's on the table, but what's clearly off the table, and the freedom to have those conversations. And if you were to have told this to a 21-year-old Tom, like, I would have been incredulous and been like, no, how can you, like, I don't know, physical touch was just always very foreign and scary and awkward to me. But yeah, it's been a journey, I guess, over the last several years, especially, of being able to engage in those conversations and being able to experience healthy physical touch that maybe from the outside looking in, like, looks different than what they are accustomed to. But I think as long as the communication is there, I think that can make all the difference.
Yeah, and I think bigger picture with, our whole culture and different generations, I think we do see younger men being more comfortable with physical affection, more comfortable with physical touch with each other, and I do think that kind of reflects changing. I think that's caused by just changing views of masculinity.
Right.
I think there's a certain type of masculinity from older generations where, where it's threatening to your masculinity to give or receive physical affection from other men. But to our generation, and maybe probably more so to younger generations than us, like that's less and less threatening to masculinity.
Yeah, and it reminds me actually of when we had Richard Padilla on this show when we talked about physical touch. And he referenced a book. He actually referenced a couple books, which someone else actually took it upon themselves to mail to us. And actually I featured that on one of our Manly Monday videos. I'll have links to all of these on our show notes for this episode. But it was just a book showcasing photography from, the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s of men who were very physically affectionate with each other, posing for photographs with arms around each other, or even like sitting on each other's laps or whatever. And clearly nothing sexual implied from any of these photos. This is just how they were. And it's that it's the sandwich generation that Marshall, that you come from, and that Ryan and I's parents come from. Like that's kind of the one it feels, just from the stories I've heard and your stories that you've shared, Marshall, it makes me feel like there's something shifted in y'all's generation, and now it feels like it's maybe bouncing back toward, we can touch each other, we can hug, we can lay our arms on each other, we can not sexualize every single thing, even though that's still very much a drive of the culture, is a lot of sexualization. But I think there is this like undercurrent of just wanting to redefine masculinity or step away from what's been passed down. So there are actually several other concepts that we could have dove into in this episode.
Dived.
Concepts like the locker room. How has the locker room changed from Marshall's generation to our generation? Or taking that even further to Korean spas, or if we wanted to talk about celibate partnerships for a second episode in a row, we could have talked about that concept.
We could hint at talking about celibate partnerships for a second episode. Let's just keep doing that. Let's keep promising that for the YOBaLOGUE.
Right.
Yeah.
If you really want to hear us talk about celibate partnerships, subscribe to the YOBaLOGUE.
Yeah.
Only those that are patrons have the secret code.
Only those who pay money have the right to dive into this this controversial topic. Yeah. We only want to hear from you if you're paying, okay? Like I don't get paid enough to get fussed at by people who aren't paying.
We don't need to be fussed at by baby boomers who do not understand celibate partnerships. The last thing that I need right now. So the point is, though, that there are plenty of things that have changed over the years, and we just don't have time. We could sit here all night talking about everything that's changed from 1955 to 2018, but plenty of opportunities in the future for more episodes, I'm sure. Like I said, I think it'd be really fun to have like Marshall on, have someone from our generation, definitely have a Gen Zer, someone who's 18, 19, just coming up in this new culture that's forming before our eyes. And then maybe throw in like a 40-something or someone in the middle. Like it would be fascinating to just get a more rounded conversation rather than just these two specific generations. So who knows? Stay tuned. Maybe that can happen in the future. In addition, we had plenty of excellent questions from our yobbers, which we don't have time to answer all of. But there's one that I wanted to close with, and it's this question. And he asks, what is one thing that you want to see changed so that the upcoming generation, whether SSA or OSA, could deal with the topic of same-sex attraction better?
I would want there to be the type of honesty where people can ask questions and not either be given a label or be put in a category, whatever, just because they're asking a question. But where they can, seriously talk about their feelings and what's good and what's bad about their feelings. Certainly judge them by God's standards, Scripture, and not be ashamed to talk about what's actually happening with them and how, and then they can decide themselves whether, what it means to obey Scripture and how to do that within that. Further into honesty where people can be honest without being shamed for it. But then I also certainly hope that people can continue to see the value in going God's way, that they can hear how someone chooses to follow Jesus Christ and obey, and instead of doing these sexual things, can obey what God has said and live a much better way and still be happy. The people would hear both sides, and that they wouldn't just hear one side and get shamed into not listening to another side. And they would be able to honestly see the truth for what it is, instead of this shaded stuff where there's all these labels.
What would you change, Ryan, or what would you like to see changed?
I would like to see many of the structures in society kind of shift and reorganize so that there are more options for finding intimacy and companionship and relational commitment than just marriage or sexual relationships. I'd like to see more options for people, whether they're straight or not, to find contexts where they can build a life together with the people around them in very affectionate and relationally fulfilling ways. And I think that would serve the next generation of same-sex attracted Christians a lot better.
Yeah, actually, I mentioned at the top of the show driving to Knoxville to listen to a friend preach a sermon, and his message was all about singleness and how you read through scripture and singleness is very highly regarded, highly encouraged by many authors, and how there's not a really healthy translation of that in church cultures today. It's a very married-centric church culture, and there's plenty of amazing marriages out there, but there's not a whole lot of nurturing environments for single people. And people are single. He did a great job laying out, like, there are plenty of reasons why people are single beyond issues of sexuality. You have widows and you have widowers, you have the divorced, you have a surplus of women in the church and not enough men, and so there's going to be women that are just left out to dry because there's not enough men to go around, and so we have all these reasons for singleness, and singleness is on the rise. Again, sexuality aside, you look at all the figures, and marriage is on the decline, and singleness is on the rise. So I think figuring out just like a space for the single Jesus follower moving forward, again, that goes beyond issues of sexuality. I would like to see the single Christian, whether he's 18, whether he's 31, whether he's 58, 59, whether he's 75, feel like they have a place, that they have a home. And because I know that is something that scares a lot of younger believers, especially who are same-sex attracted or gay or have a traditional ethic, that, okay, that's fine for today, it's fine for now, like I can deal with it for right now, but like in 30 years and 50 years, how am I still going to be doing this? Some time ago, I worked one of my most excruciating jobs that I've ever worked for a summer in the streets of Milwaukee, as churches would bring their youth groups from all over the country for a week at a time to have fun, play games, and enjoy some time away from all that they know, but also to work, to serve. And little did I know at the time that I would be one working and serving in all the same profound ways that these kids in youth groups would do. I distinctly remember a time of serving in a nursing home with a dozen or so kids at a time, and seeing the absolute joy on these senior citizens' faces when they would see these youthful faces flooding their halls, playing bingo with them, bowling with them, helping them push a ball down a ramp to knock over some pins on the other side of the room, working on puzzles and playing cards, and simply sitting next to them at tables, seeing elderly hands reach onto shoulders of 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds who
by all accounts, weren't doing much. We're simply present and simply there. And I got such a picture all summer long of the power of the generations, of one lending something to the other, something true, something tangible, something absolutely vital. Because what I saw was not just smiles and life and vitality on the faces of these elderly individuals. I saw something similarly powerful and tangible in the faces of these teenagers, that they were uncovering something true about this world, something amazing and incredible about this world in which we all coexist. That it isn't just one generation passing a baton to the other. It's both working simultaneously, concurrently, passing batons back and forth. The band Casting Crowns wrote a song called City on the Hill, in which the lyrics read as follows. Did you hear of the city on the hill? Said one old man to the other. It once shined bright, and it would be shining still, but they all started turning on each other. You see, the poets thought the dancers were shallow, and the soldiers thought the poets were weak, and the elders saw the young ones as foolish, and the rich man never heard the poor man speak. But one by one, they ran away, with their made-up minds to leave it all behind, and the light began to fade in the city on the hill. Each one thought that they knew better, but they were different by design. Instead of standing strong together, they let their differences divide. But it was the rhythm of the dancers that gave the poets life. It was the spirit of the poets that gave the soldiers strength to fight. It was the fire of the young ones. It was the wisdom of the old. It was the story of the poor man that needed to be told. But one by one will we run away, with our made-up minds to leave it all behind, as the light begins to fade in the city on the hill. And so, my brothers, baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, and generations to come, let us not leave it all behind. This testimony, this brotherhood, this digital and physical city on a hill. Let us not run away from what divides us. Let us instead press into these divides all the more. As the nose and ear and foot lend varying functions to the body, so let us aid one another in this collective body. The young assisting the old, and the old guiding the young. Each generation infusing something vital into the other. Let us behave in such a way that all generations, including the upcoming generation, find so brightly our light. Let us help one another along this journey, shining this light of Christ for any and all who pass by, who look up, discover it, who want to see more.
Well, y'all, the great meeting of the minds, the meeting of the generations is complete. You may now take off your hats and fancy robes. We will,
keep the little placards in front of us.
Right, you can
as a souvenir.
Souvenirs, yeah, absolutely. The baby boomers and millennials. Sorry, there was no room at the table for all the other generations, but no, this was a fun conversation. It was a little scattered, a little diverse, but I'm excited for potentially deeper dives into this concept. I'm really excited about finding common ground. I mean, I think that's what it's all about, is we have so many diverse upbringings and backgrounds, places that we come from, both in geography and in time. And there's no one group that's necessarily better than the other. We all have our advantages. We all have our disadvantages. And I think we can all learn from each other. So I would love you, dear listener, to add to the conversation. Head over to our podcast episode page, yourotherbrothers.com/podcast. Find this episode 42 post on generations. And firstly, tell me what your generation is. Tell me your age. Tell me your generation. And tell me your experience with regard to all of these things that we talked about today. Some or all. You could talk about sexuality and concepts of coming out. You can talk about cuddling. You can talk about marriage. You can talk about the church. Any or all of those things are on the table. I'd love to hear your story, your generational perspective on all of these matters. And I'm excited to continue this conversation, and it'll be great. This was fun.
Mm-hmm. And thank you to our sponsor, Denim Apple Pie Candles. We love timeless candles and timeless pies and timeless textiles.
Yeah.
So thank you so much to our sponsor for making this possible.
I'm really craving some apple pie. Can we make apple pie happen?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I would love to.
I think our sponsor sent us some apple pie.
Can we just eat the candle? That's the thing with those candles. I just want to eat the candles sometimes, which is not healthy. But anyway, yes, thank you, those specific candles. Very specific, for sponsoring this episode on generations. And we'll be back next time for another exciting episode. As I mentioned at the start, you can listen to the end of this episode in just another minute or so and get a little sneak peek of the YOBaLOGUE. And if you're curious, want to check out more, head on over to our Patreon page. That'll do it for this episode. For all your other brothers, this is Tom.
This is Millennial Ryan.
This is Marshall, the older guy.
Reminding you that you are not alone. Even the sparrow finds a home. See you next time, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Your Other Brothers podcast. Navigate more with us at yourotherbrothers.com and comment on this episode at yourotherbrothers.com/podcast. Subscribe to our show to never miss an episode. And if you enjoy what we do, consider rating and reviewing us on iTunes. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Your Other Bros. If you'd like to further support our storytelling effort, consider becoming a Yobber. Yobbers pledge monthly and receive perks like calls with authors and other supporters, access to a secret Facebook group, and additional podcast content. Visit patreon.com/yourotherbros for more information. Don't miss our monthly bonus podcast on Patreon, the YOBaLOGUE, featuring responses to previous podcasts, content not featured in public episodes, calls from listeners, and more. Ask us a question or tell us a story by leaving us a message at 706-389-8009. If you're new to the show, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at podcast@yourotherbrothers.com. You can also write us at Your Other Brothers, P.O. Box 843, Asheville, North Carolina 28802. Until we journey next time, we're glad you're with us. This is the YOBaLOGUE for Your Other Brothers podcast.
Welcome, friends, to the YOBaLOGUE, the second YOBaLOGUE of all time. If you liked the first one, I hope you like the second one. And if you didn't like the first one, well, you're probably not listening to this one, so that's not my concern. What's up, everybody? What's up, Yobbers? I always have to remind myself I'm talking to more than just friends in these episodes, in these podcasts. I'm talking to Yobbers. I'm talking to people who are pledging monthly, every single month on Patreon. And you guys are awesome. You are our faithful Yobbers and our Yobbies as well, not to be neglected, as we have a few Yobbies in our midst as well. Welcome, y'all. This is the YOBaLOGUE, and it's an experiment. It's a continuing, seeing how this goes type of deal. And as far as I can tell, the feedback that I got from the first one, it seemed like y'all enjoyed it. So thanks for the feedback. I appreciate that. And we got a full episode today. I'm going to get right to it, because in this episode, we are doing a quick little recap of our last YOBcast, where we talked about being side B. It was me, Ryan, and Matt on that particular episode, episode 41 of Your Other Brothers podcast. And a really great conversation, a really great exchange. And I'm going to say right off the bat, you do not want to miss the bonus content at the end of this episode of the YOBaLOGUE, because we actually have a section from that conversation with myself, Matt, and with Ryan that couldn't make it into the actual episode of Your Other Brothers podcast. And it was a legitimate segment. I was really torn, actually, about including it, not including it. in the end, I decided to cut it because it felt a little extra. It felt like a tack on. And this is definitely a subject I'd like to actually tackle in a future YOBcast episode. And that is the subject of, drumroll. Does that sound like a drum? It's the subject of, it's a fun one. It's the subject of celibate gay partnerships, or like sexless romances, or like, there has lots of trendy names for it. Yeah, we actually got into a little bit of a discussion about that because it's part of the side B world. It's kind of like a niche arena of side B life. This whole concept of, not getting married to the same sex, but having somebody who's kind of like a husband, kind of like a boyfriend, but you're not having sex with him, and you kind of do life together. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I definitely recommend listening, if only for Matthew's reaction, because if you know Matthew, and some of you do, some of you don't, but Matthew's reaction is great to this conversation, and we'll tack that on at the end, along with other cut content and bloopers, including a segment where Matthew sounds like a robot. You do not want to miss the end of the YOBaLOGUE. Big props to Matthew for coming on the show. He has a unique perspective. I always love it when he's on the podcast. And I have a feeling he keeps bringing it up, and he keeps texting me and messaging me about doing a #YOBfashion episode. And I'm all about it. I would love to do a fashion episode. And I think, honestly, we have some really trendy, fashionable people in our community. And I am not one to boast my my fashion and my trends. And I'm always moldable and adaptable and wanting to learn, what the kids are wearing and how to present myself well and be confident in what I'm wearing. So we'll see. We'll see if we can get that fashion episode happening sooner than later. So we didn't receive any hipster contest pictures in the last couple weeks since the episode aired, but we did receive 2 phone calls. 2 phone calls, and we're going to play those in a little bit. And I'm really excited because this new phone number that we have, I'm super jazzed about it. And I love every time I get a notification in my email that someone left a message, I just get super giddy and super happy, and really happy that people are reacting to the episode and sharing stories and sharing ideas. And I just want to encourage everyone in our midst to give us a call, not only about the last episode, but about anything related to YOB, to YOBers, to our Facebook group, to Patreon, to any of our bloggers. If you have a question, if you have a comment about one of our authors or one of our voices on the podcast, including myself, that number is available to you 24/7. It's 706-389-8009. You can give me a call right now. That'd be great. I will say that there are some people who, there's people across the board, people who only listen to the podcast or only read the blog. And then you have others, the hardcore, the hardcore yobbers in our midst, who will digest everything, who will digest the podcast and the blog and be super active in the Facebook group and watch our videos. So I'm like speaking to whatever cross section is out there right now. But some of you may or may not be aware, but this podcast on Y Side B, our 41st episode, was one of our most commented. In recent memory, certainly of all time, but it's certainly in recent memory, it is one of our most commented episodes on the blog. 50 plus comments as of this recording. Some really good stories, some really good exchanges. Nothing heated, nothing uncivil. It was just a lot of good, not even back and forth. It was just a lot of people responding and replying to other people, which I really love to see as the editor. I love to see engagement. It's not just people commenting into a void, but there's actually engagement among, 2, 3, 4, 5 people back and forth in just a great harmonious way. And it was a great place of sharing stuff. If you haven't checked out the podcast comments in a while, I recommend checking this one out. yourotherbrothers.com/podcast. Go to the episode 41 page. And I was just going to read a couple of notable ones on this episode. And before we move into the listener calls, this one was from Wave Dave. What's up, Wave Dave? One of the best discus names that are out there, actually. That's such a great name. Wave Dave. Mad props to Wave Dave. Wave Dave says, even if others forget, misunderstand, don't include you, God hasn't forgotten me, and I am thankful for that. Thankful for this community and the blessing it is. And I'm thankful for you, Wave Dave. I'm thankful for your username, and I'm thankful for your presence. You've been pretty consistent and active in our community for a long time, and so I'm super grateful for your feedback, as always. Yeah, this community is pretty special. I'm stoked and super grateful for everyone listening, everyone supporting. Everyone who's listening is supporting your other brothers, and so I'm thankful for you, and I'm just like super happy to have people, to have a tribe, and I hope you do too.